As promised last week, I'm going to tell you about a joke that I used to tell when I was a physics tutor in college. While the joke itself was used to help people remember physics stuff for their test, I related the physics material in question to relationships. Even if you're not all that interested in physics, this particular example is one that I think anyone can understand, and I think it's one that you're going to enjoy. Now, if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, where we have the podcast with videos, I'm going to have some little visual aids that I'll describe as we go along. I have a couple computer cables here that were just sitting around my office, so I'm going to be holding those in front of me. Right now, I have a white wire and a black wire held in front of me. And we're going to assume that they're straight, and they're also simple conductors. They're not complicated computer wires. And I want you to imagine that there's current flowing through each one of these wires so that I can explain the physics joke. Let's assume that they're both flowing from my left hand to my right hand. I'm holding them in front of me so that they're horizontal. If the currents in both wires are flowing in the same direction, well, each one of these is going to be generating a magnetic field that circulates around the wire. And it goes around the wire based on the right-hand rule. So if you stick your thumb in the direction that current goes and curl your fingers around, then the direction that your fingers curl is the direction of the magnetic field. Using a similar right-hand rule, you'd be able to calculate the force between the magnetic field generated by one wire and the current flowing in the other. Ultimately, if you do the physics right, what you find is that when the current in both wires is going in the same direction, the wires feel an attractive force, and they come together. However, if the currents are going in opposite directions, the wires experience repulsive forces, and they force each other apart. When I would explain this physical property to students who were studying physics, I would say, well, when the currents are going in the same direction, they come together because they see their futures going together. They have the same mutual path, they have the same goals, and they come together and stay together forever. Isn't that beautiful? Then I would switch over and say, if the currents are going in opposite directions in the wires, they experience forces that separate them and send them in different directions because they see their futures not necessarily going in the same way, but they understand they have differences and they don't necessarily need to have a mutual future. After explaining this under my breath, I would say, and this is the reaction that I get from every girl that I've ever tried to talk to. This would often get a laugh and help them remember the material on exams. I remember getting some students who would write down quotes from my jokes on their exams. When they'd get the exam back, they'd show it to me and say, look, I was able to remember this. Now that I'm a financial coach, I look at this as a different sort of metaphor. If I were to tell the joke again, instead of beating up on myself, I would say that when your values and your virtues are flowing in the same direction and you work on finding common ground, you work on having that mutual vision for the future, it helps you come together as a married couple and grow closer together. Meanwhile, if you hold separate views, separate values that you would judge each other for, things that you don't necessarily approve the other of having, well, your currents, your values are somewhat going in opposite directions. And if you do that enough when it comes to the way that you spend your money, it can drive you apart. And that's one way that we can understand how money works in a negative way to tear marriages apart when not managed properly. Whether you're a believer or not, the Bible talks about the wisdom where your money lies, where your treasure lies, there your heart will be also. Ultimately, where we spend our money is a representation of our priorities, especially if we're being very intentional with our spending with the budget. We allocate money according to our values, according to our needs, but then with our wants, we're basically voting with our money as to what matters to us. And within marriage, if your votes aren't compatible with each other and you're not talking about those votes so that the other understands where your values lie and learns how to respect them instead of judge them, well, that's when you end up with that problem and the forces pull things apart.